The day my husband threw me out with garbage bags, I discovered my dead father had left me $3 million I never knew existed. My name is Marlo, and I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. 7 years. That's how long I spent building a life with Garrett. We met when he was managing a sporting goods store in Nashville, and I was working reception at a dental office. Nothing fancy, but we were happy. Or at least I thought we were. He climbed the ladder fast. Store manager to regional director. I was proud of him. Supported every late night, every business trip, every strategy meeting that ran past midnight. 6 months ago, something shifted. He stopped looking at me during dinner, started sleeping with his phone face down. When I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd snap that I was being paranoid. Last Tuesday, I came home to find my entire life stuffed into trash bags on the front porch. Garrett stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, like he was blocking a stranger from entering. The man I'd loved for 7 years looked at me with the cold efficiency of someone canceling a subscription. He told me it was over, told me to be gone by morning. When I reminded him we'd bought this house together, he actually laughed. That's when he explained he'd refinanced 2 years ago, put everything in his name alone. I'd signed the papers because he said it was better for taxes. I'd trusted him completely. Then he told me about Chelsea, about the baby, about the wedding next month. I spent that night on my friend Jade's couch, crying until my ribs ached. The next morning, digging through my purse for my ID to open a new bank account, I found something I hadn't seen in 20 years. A faded bank card with my father's name on it. This is the story of how the worst day of my life became the beginning of everything else. It's long and it's painful, and I'm going to need you with me to get through it. If you want to know how a forgotten piece of plastic changed everything, stay close. You won't want to miss what happened next. My father died when I was 12. Car accident on I-40, black ice, gone in seconds. After the funeral, my mother remarried within 6 months. A man named Dale who made it clear I was an inconvenience in his new life. By 18, I'd saved enough from my job at the movie theater to leave. I never looked back, never contacted my mother again, cut every tie to that part of my life. But somehow, through years of moves and marriages and new beginnings, my father's bank card stayed tucked in a pocket of my wallet. I'd forgotten it was even there. Standing in Jade's bathroom that morning, staring at that scratched piece of plastic, I felt something I couldn't name. The card was so old the magnetic strip was half worn away. Central Tennessee Bank. I didn't even know if that bank still existed. I had nothing to lose, so I drove to the address printed on the back. The branch was in a strip mall near the airport, wedged between a nail salon and a tax preparation office. Inside, it smelled like coffee and printer toner. I approached the counter feeling ridiculous. The teller was a young guy, couldn't have been more than 25. I slid the card across to him. He scanned it, frowned, scanned it again. Then his expression changed. He excused himself and disappeared into a back office. 5 minutes later, a woman in her 50s emerged. She introduced herself as Patricia Kern, branch manager. She asked me to follow her to a private office. My stomach started doing flips. Patricia sat across from me, hands folded on the desk. She asked for my ID. I handed it over, watching her compare my face to the information on her screen. She typed something, paused, typed more. Then she stood up abruptly. She returned with an older man, silver-haired, wearing a suit that had seen better days. He looked at me like I was a ghost. He asked if I was Marlo Brennan, daughter of Stuart Brennan. When I confirmed, he actually sat down hard, like his legs had given out. He told me they'd been looking for me for 20 years. My father had opened a savings account in my name the day I was born. Every month, without fail, he deposited money. Not a lot, $50, sometimes $100, but he never missed a month. By the time he died, the account held $50,000. I felt tears starting. My father, who I barely remembered, had been building something for me all along. But that wasn't the end of it. The bank had tried to locate me after his death. They'd contacted my mother, who told them I'd run away, and she had no idea where I was. She never mentioned the account, never told me it existed. The bank held the money, waiting, as required by law. And for 20 years, that money sat there, growing. The manager, his name was Howard, turned his computer screen toward me. He pointed to a number that didn't make sense. $2,340,000. I asked him to repeat it. He did. I asked if there was a mistake. He showed me the statements, year by year, the compound interest building on itself. My father had chosen a high-yield account. Nobody had touched it. It had grown exponentially. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. Then, Howard mentioned the life insurance policy. $500,000, also unclaimed. With accumulated interest and statutory additions, it was worth $800,000 now. Combined with the savings account, the total was $3,140,000. I signed documents I barely read. They transferred everything to a new account in my name only. When I walked out of that bank 2 hours later, I was a multimillionaire wearing yesterday's clothes from a garbage bag. The first thing I did was call the best divorce attorney in Nashville. Her name was Beatrice Kane, and when I told her my story, she smiled in a way that made me feel safe for the first time in weeks. She said Garrett had made several critical mistakes, and we were going to make him pay for every single one. Beatrice worked fast. Within 48 hours, she'd filed for divorce and requested a forensic examination of all marital assets. She explained that Tennessee was an equitable distribution state. Everything acquired during the marriage had to be divided fairly. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, all of it. Garrett's first response was arrogance. He had his company's lawyer send a dismissive letter stating the house was solely in his name and therefore not subject to division. They included a copy of the refinance documents I'd signed 2 years earlier. Beatrice read the letter, then looked at me over her reading glasses. She asked if I remembered signing those papers. I told her Garrett had brought them home one evening, said it was just paperwork to get a better interest rate. He'd pointed to the signature lines. I'd signed, and that was it. I never read the details. She made a note. Then she asked if the house had been purchased with joint funds originally. I confirmed we'd both contributed to the down payment. I'd used $12,000 from my savings. The mortgage payments came from our joint account, paid with both our incomes. Beatrice explained that the refinance was likely fraudulent. Just because something's in one person's name doesn't erase the other person's equitable interest, especially if they were deceived about what they were signing. She said we had grounds to challenge it, but there was something else bothering me. I asked Beatrice to look into when Garrett had started his relationship with Chelsea. If it began before he threw me out, that changed things. She hired a private investigator, a woman named Rita, former FBI, who didn't waste time. Within a week, Rita came back with a report that made my hands shake. Garrett and Chelsea had been seeing each other for 18 months. She was the manager of his Memphis location, and they'd been traveling together for business since the previous year. Chelsea was already 4 months pregnant when Garrett kicked me out. Phone records showed they'd been talking daily, sometimes for hours. Text messages recovered from Chelsea's iCloud. She'd been careless with her backup settings. Included discussions about me. Specifically, discussions about how to get rid of me. In one exchange from 3 months before he threw me out, Chelsea had written that she was tired of waiting, that she wanted to start their real life together. Garrett responded that he was working on it, that he needed to secure the house first. That's when he'd pushed the refinance. He deliberately structured it to exclude me, planning the whole time to discard me once everything was in his name. Chelsea had replied with a heart emoji and a message about how smart he was. Reading those texts, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was clarity. This hadn't been a sudden decision or a mistake. This had been calculated, premeditated. He'd spent months planning how to steal everything we'd built together and leave me with nothing. Beatrice filed an amended complaint. We added fraud, intentional misrepresentation, and dissipation of marital assets. We demanded the house be sold and proceeds split equally. We demanded half of everything in Garrett's retirement account. His stock options, his savings. We also requested attorney's fees because his conduct had been so egregious. Garrett's lawyer called Beatrice trying to negotiate. She told him there was nothing to negotiate. We had evidence of fraud and infidelity. We had proof he'd planned this for over a year. If he wanted to avoid a trial where all of this became public record, something that would certainly damage his reputation at work, he'd agreed to our terms. 2 days later, Garrett showed up at Beatrice's office unannounced. He wanted to talk to me directly. Beatrice advised against it, but I said yes. I wanted to look him in the eye. He sat across from me in that conference room. Looking smaller than I remembered, he tried to tell me this had all gotten out of hand, that maybe we could work something out privately. I asked him one question. Did Chelsea know he was here? The way his face changed told me everything I needed to know. And that's when I realized their alliance was already starting to crack. Garrett leaned forward, hands clasped together like he was praying. He said we'd had 7 good years together, that throwing that away over one mistake seemed excessive. He suggested we could settle this quietly. He'd give me $100,000 and we'd call it even. I kept my face neutral. Beatrice had coached me before he arrived. Don't show anger. Don't show hurt. Don't show your hand. I asked him why he thought I'd accept that amount. He actually looked relieved that I was engaging. He explained that $100,000 was generous considering the house was in his name, that legally he didn't have to give me anything, but because he respected what we'd had, he was willing to be fair. Fair. That word almost broke my composure. I asked about Chelsea. He hesitated, then admitted things were complicated with her. The baby was coming in 3 months, and she had expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. She wanted a big wedding, a bigger house. She'd been looking at properties in Brentwood that cost over $1 million. He said it with this exhausted tone, like he was the victim of unreasonable demands. I acted like I was considering his offer. I said $100,000 was a significant amount, that I'd need time to think about it. He brightened immediately. He promised he'd transfer the money as soon as I signed a settlement agreement. We could be done with this whole mess by next week. Beatrice walked him out. When she returned, she was already smiling. She said he'd just made a critical error. By offering me money and admitting the relationship with Chelsea was strained, he'd revealed his weak points. He was financially pressured and emotionally isolated. That made him desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. She suggested we do nothing for a week, let him think I was considering the offer, let him get comfortable. Meanwhile, she'd continue building our case. During that week, Rita the investigator uncovered something else. Chelsea had been married before. Her divorce had been finalized only 6 months before she'd started seeing Garrett. Her ex-husband was a doctor in Memphis, and their settlement had been contentious. Chelsea had walked away with $200,000 and immediately started spending it. New car, luxury apartment, designer, everything. Rita found Chelsea's social media accounts. Despite making them private recently, earlier posts were still visible through cache searches. Photos of her and Garrett together at restaurants, at his company events. One photo from 8 months ago showed Chelsea wearing what looked like an engagement ring. The caption read, "Good things come to those who wait." That post was dated 2 weeks after Garrett had pushed me to sign the refinance papers. Beatrice compiled everything into a binder. Text messages, financial records, social media posts, phone logs showing thousands of calls between Garrett and Chelsea during work hours, credit card statements showing he'd been paying for hotel rooms in Memphis twice a month for over a year, receipts for jewelry, receipts for a weekend trip to New Orleans. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture. This wasn't an affair that had developed recently. This was a long-term relationship he'd hidden while systematically positioning himself to take everything and leave me with nothing. At the end of the week, Garrett texted me. He asked if I'd thought about his offer. He said he really wanted to move forward, to end this with dignity. He even said he hoped we could part as friends. I responded that I needed a few more days, that I wanted to make sure I was making the right decision. He replied immediately, "Take your time. I'll wait." You deserve to feel good about this. I showed the message to Beatrice. She laughed, a sharp, satisfied sound. She said it was time to show him exactly what we'd found. She drafted a response to his settlement offer. In legal language, it laid out every piece of evidence we'd gathered. It detailed the fraud, the affair, the premeditated planning. It demanded the house be sold immediately, all assets divided, and that Garrett pay my attorney fees. The last line read, "Your offer of $100, won't our dollars is rejected. See you in court." We sent it on a Friday afternoon. By Sunday night, Chelsea had left him. Rita called me Monday morning. Chelsea had moved out of Garrett's house over the weekend. A moving truck had arrived Saturday afternoon, and she'd taken furniture, electronics, even kitchen appliances. Neighbors reported hearing shouting. One mentioned seeing Garrett standing on the lawn, yelling at the truck as it drove away. Beatrice requested an emergency hearing. She argued that Garrett was dissipating marital assets, allowing his girlfriend to take property that should be part of the divorce settlement. The judge granted a temporary restraining order, freezing all assets and preventing any further transfers. That's when Garrett's lawyer withdrew from the case. No explanation given, but Beatrice suspected Garrett couldn't pay his retainer anymore. He hired a cheaper attorney, someone young and inexperienced who worked out of a strip mall office. During a deposition 2 weeks later, Garrett looked different, thinner, dark circles under his eyes. His new lawyer kept objecting to questions, but Beatrice was relentless. She asked about every hotel receipt, every dinner charge, every piece of jewelry he'd bought Chelsea with money from our joint account. The breaking point came when she asked about a $10,000 withdrawal he'd made 3 months before he kicked me out. He claimed it was for a work expense. Beatrice produced a receipt showing he'd actually bought Chelsea a Cartier bracelet. He'd stolen money from our joint savings to buy jewelry for the woman he was planning to replace me with. After the deposition, his lawyer asked for another settlement negotiation. This time, Garrett was offering to split the house proceeds 50-50 and give me half the joint savings. Beatrice laughed. She said we were past negotiations. We were going to trial, and we were going to win everything. But something else was happening that I didn't expect. Chelsea came back. Rita discovered this through surveillance. Chelsea returned to Garrett's house on a Tuesday evening, carrying an overnight bag. She stayed 3 nights, then left again. The pattern repeated. She was clearly using him, staying when she needed something, leaving when she was angry or bored. I asked Rita to find out more about Chelsea's financial situation. What she discovered was illuminating. Chelsea had burned through her divorce settlement in less than a year. The luxury apartment was being paid for by Garrett. The car lease was in his name. She'd maxed out 3 credit cards and was being sued by 2 creditors. She'd targeted Garrett because he appeared successful and stable. She'd gotten pregnant deliberately. There were texts to a friend discussing going off birth control without telling him, because she wanted to lock him down. The wedding she'd been planning was going to cost $80,000, and she'd been pressuring Garrett to take out a personal loan to cover it. But now, with our divorce turning ugly and Garrett's assets frozen, Chelsea was realizing he wasn't the golden ticket she'd thought. She was sticking around just long enough to see if he'd emerge from the divorce with anything worth taking. One evening, Rita managed to record a conversation between Chelsea and a friend at a bar in Memphis. Chelsea complained that Garrett was useless now, that she'd wasted almost 2 years on him, that she should have stuck with her doctor ex-husband instead of trading down. She said once the baby was born, she'd pursue child support, but she wasn't interested in actually being with Garrett long term. She called him a stepping stone. I listened to that recording in Beatrice's office. Part of me expected to feel satisfaction, proof that Chelsea was exactly the kind of person who deserved someone like Garrett. But instead, I felt something unexpected. I felt free. Because I realized I'd been holding on to anger toward Chelsea as if she'd stolen something precious from me. But listening to her talk about Garrett like he was a failed investment, I understood the truth. She hadn't stolen anything. She'd just shown me who Garrett really was before I wasted more years on him. Beatrice asked if I wanted to use the recording in court. I said no, it wasn't necessary. We already had everything we needed. The house sold 3 weeks later, and that's when everything finally fell apart for Garrett in ways he never saw coming. The house sold for $340,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage and closing costs, there was $170,000 to split. Beatrice ensured I received my half immediately, deposited into my new account that already held $3 million from my father's legacy. Garrett received his half too, but he'd accumulated debt. $20,000 in legal fees, $15,000 in credit card bills that Chelsea had helped him run up, and a personal loan of $30,000 he'd taken out for her wedding that never happened. His $85,000 was gone within weeks. Meanwhile, his job situation was deteriorating. Corporate had started asking questions about his expense reports, the same reports that showed hundreds of unauthorized charges for personal travel and entertainment with Chelsea. Someone had sent an anonymous tip to the company's ethics hotline. Rita suggested it might have been a disgruntled coworker who'd suspected the affair. Garrett was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His salary was suspended. His stock options were frozen. Chelsea left him for good when she found out. Rita documented her moving into an apartment paid for by a new boyfriend, a real estate developer she'd met at a charity event. She was 6 months pregnant with Garrett's child, and she'd already moved on. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in October. The judge ruled in my favor on every point. Garrett had to surrender half of his remaining retirement account, about $40,000. He was ordered to pay my attorney's fees, another $18,000. The fraud finding meant he received no spousal support and no sympathy from the court. Walking out of the courthouse, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired, like I'd been carrying something heavy for months and had finally set it down. Beatrice took me to lunch at a cafe downtown. She told me I'd done well, that most people in my situation would have fallen apart. I thanked her, but admitted I wasn't sure what came next. For months, the divorce had been my focus. Now, with it over, I was standing in the space where my old life used to be, unsure how to build a new one. She asked me what I'd wanted to do before Garrett, what dreams I'd set aside during those 7 years. I thought about it. When I was younger, before I'd convinced myself to be practical and safe, I'd wanted to study architecture. I'd loved drawing buildings, imagining spaces. But architecture school was expensive and competitive, and I'd talked myself out of it. Told myself administrative work was more realistic. Beatrice said I had $3 million and no obligations. If not now, when? I drove to Vanderbilt University that afternoon, walked into the School of Architecture like I belonged there, picked up an admissions packet. The application deadline for spring enrollment was in 2 weeks. I spent those 2 weeks writing essays, gathering transcripts from my community college days, and preparing a portfolio of sketches I'd done over the years, mostly in notebook margins during boring meetings at work. I submitted the application expecting nothing, but 6 weeks later, I received an acceptance letter. They'd even offered me a small scholarship, though with my resources, I didn't need it. Still, it felt validating. Like they wanted me for my work, not my money. I started classes in January. At 32, I was older than most of my classmates, but I didn't care. I was finally doing something I loved. With the rest of the money, I worked with a financial advisor, a woman named Simone who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. She helped me invest $2 million conservatively. The returns would cover my living expenses indefinitely. I could focus on school without worrying about money. I bought a house in Franklin, nothing massive or showy, just a 3-bedroom cottage with a big yard and a studio space where I could work on projects. It was mine. Only my name on the deed. And then I did something I'd been thinking about since the day I'd learned about my father's gift. I decided to make sure his legacy extended beyond me. I named it the Stuart Brennan Foundation. The mission was simple: help young people who'd fled abusive homes get access to education and stable housing. Kids like I'd been at 18, terrified and alone, who needed someone to believe they deserved better. I worked with attorneys to set up the structure. The foundation would provide scholarships, rental assistance, and mentorship programs. We'd partner with universities and community colleges across Tennessee, identifying students who'd aged out of foster care or escaped dangerous situations. We'd give them not just money, but support systems. The first year, we helped 12 students, paid their tuition, covered their rent, connected them with therapists and advisors, watched them stabilize and start building lives they'd never imagined possible. One girl, Tasha, had been living in her car while attending community college. We got her into an apartment, paid for her nursing school prerequisites, and connected her with a study group. She cried when I met her in person. She said nobody had ever invested in her like this. I told her my father had invested in me without me even knowing. And now I was just passing it forward. The foundation became the most meaningful part of my life. More than school, more than the house, more than anything else I did with the money. It was the proof that pain could be transformed into purpose. During this time, I made a decision about my mother. I needed closure, even if it wasn't going to be pleasant. I drove to the address I'd found for her, a trailer park outside Murfreesboro. She was living in a rusted single-wide with Dale, her husband. The place looked defeated, sagging under years of neglect. I knocked. She answered, older and harder than I remembered. She recognized me immediately. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Maybe regret, maybe just surprise. Then it closed off. I asked why she'd never told me about my father's account. She crossed her arms, said I'd abandoned them, that I hadn't earned the right to that money. I reminded her I was 12 when my father died, that I'd been a child, that she'd married Dale and let him make my life hell until I'd had no choice but to leave. She didn't apologize, didn't show remorse, just said I'd always been difficult, that I'd made my own choices. I realized then that I'd never get what I came for. She wasn't capable of accountability or growth. She'd chosen bitterness, and she'd live in it forever. I told her I'd used the money to build something good, that I'd created a foundation helping kids who'd been abandoned like I was. I said my father would have been proud. She slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, then walked back to my car. And driving away, I felt something release. I'd spent years carrying the weight of her rejection, wondering what I'd done wrong, why I hadn't been enough. But standing in front of that trailer, seeing the life she'd chosen, I understood. Her misery wasn't about me. It was about her. 2 months later, she and Dale tried to sue me. Claimed I owed them financial support because I was their daughter. They argued that family had an obligation to help family, and that my wealth meant I should be providing for them. The case was laughed out of court. The judge noted that I'd been estranged from them for 14 years, that they'd hidden assets from me, and that there was no legal basis for their claim. He suggested they focus on managing their own finances rather than trying to exploit mine. I never heard from them again. Meanwhile, Garrett had started texting me. The messages began casually, asking how I was, mentioning memories from our marriage. Then they became more direct. He said he'd made mistakes, that he'd been confused, overwhelmed by Chelsea's attention, that what we'd had was real and he'd thrown it away. I read each message, then deleted it without responding. Until one night, he sent a message that made me realize he still didn't understand anything. The message read, "Marlo, I know I hurt you, but I also know you're doing well now. Maybe this all happened for a reason. Maybe we both needed this to become who we're supposed to be. I'm proud of you. Can we talk?" Proud of me. As if he'd had anything to do with who I'd become. As if my success was somehow connected to him throwing me away. I realized then that Garrett would never understand what he'd actually done. In his mind, he'd made a mistake, but it had worked out for everyone. I'd landed on my feet, so there was no harm. He'd rewritten the narrative to make himself less of a villain. But what he didn't know was that I hadn't landed on my feet because of resilience or luck. I'd landed on my feet because my father, 20 years after his death, had caught me. Garrett had tried to destroy me, and he'd failed because I'd been protected by love that transcended time and death. I blocked his number. There was nothing to say to him. He was a chapter that had closed, and I wasn't interested in rereading it. Chelsea had the baby, a boy. I saw it on social media through a mutual acquaintance. She'd named him something trendy and was already posting sponsored content about baby products. Garrett wasn't in any of the photos. From what I heard, he paid child support but had minimal custody. Chelsea had moved to Atlanta with the real estate developer, who'd apparently decided he could tolerate raising another man's child. Garrett was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Antioch, working a mid-level position at a different retail company. He'd lost everything he'd built at his previous job. No more executive role, no more stock options, no more reputation. I didn't take pleasure in his downfall. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied. I felt nothing. He'd become irrelevant to my story. Today, I'm finishing my second year of architecture school. My professors say I have a natural eye for sustainable design. I'm working on my thesis project, a housing complex for young adults transitioning out of foster care. The Stuart Brennan Foundation has agreed to partner with me if I can get it built. We've identified a site in East Nashville. It could happen. The foundation has grown. We're now supporting 38 students across Tennessee. Last month, one of our first scholarship recipients, a young man named Marcus who'd been homeless at 19, graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. He got a job at a firm in Chattanooga. At the reception, he thanked me and said the foundation had saved his life. I told him it wasn't me. It was my father. I was just the messenger. I've started dating someone, a professor at Vanderbilt, kind and steady and completely unimpressed by money. He loves me for reasons that have nothing to do with what I have and everything to do with who I am. We're taking it slow. I'm not in a hurry anymore. Last week, I visited my father's grave for the first time in 20 years. I brought flowers and sat in the grass next to his headstone. I told him about the foundation, about school, about the life I'm building with the gift he left me. I told him I understood now what he'd been trying to do. He'd wanted to make sure I'd be okay even if he couldn't be there. And I was. I was more than okay. That day, when Garrett threw my belongings into garbage bags and told me I was worthless, he thought he was ending my story. But he was just clearing space for the real story to begin. My father left me $3 million. But more than that, he left me proof that I was loved, that I mattered, that I deserved to be protected and valued. Garrett gave me nothing and took everything he could, but he couldn't take what he didn't know existed. And what he didn't know was that I'd always been carrying my father's love with me, tucked in a forgotten pocket, waiting for the moment I'd need it most. I'm here today because love doesn't die. It compounds. It grows. And when you need it most, it shows up exactly when you need it. So, to anyone watching from wherever you are in the world, leave a comment and tell me what city you're calling from. I'd love to know this story reached you. And if you want to follow more stories like this one, you know what to do. Subscribe, because everyone deserves to know that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the door opening to everything you were meant to become. My name is Marlo. My father saved me 20 years after he died. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure his love keeps saving others.